just settling in. And again, all you might need this evening is a candle, perhaps. If you don't have one, I'll light one for the group. Pen and paper. And that's all. And we've got a beautiful big group again. I'm very grateful to you all for spending the time here. So we'll just let everyone come from the waiting room before I dive in. Okay. I think we will begin. So hopefully you can all see me. Welcome back, everyone. Just taking a moment to arrive. And some of you will have been here live yesterday. Some of you will have watched the replay. Sorry, it's just some things going on my screen. Bear with me. There we are, that's better. And some of you might be here for the first time. And if you're here for the first time, don't worry. You can start with this evening and then go back from there. So yesterday, we really opened a bit of a doorway. We connected to the deeper vision that's drawn you to this work of gathering groups, this work of circle, this sense of a longing for something more, a connection to something sacred, a way of gathering people that feels incredibly rooted and grounded and what our world needs now. And we spoke about our vision for this work on 3 levels: the vision we hold for ourselves, the vision we hold for our community, and the vision we hold for our world. And it was very much in the visioning and remembering space, the kind of like, you know, what might happen if we did this. Today is going to be a lot more practical. And we're going to take the next step and begin to ask, what does it really take to hold circle well? I'm imagining that you're here because you care about the possibility of holding space, like you feel drawn to do it. And you might be here because you want to do it well. So many people in advance of this have expressed to me, I want to, if I hold a group, know that I'm doing a good job, know that I'm not causing harm. And that's one of the things that we're going to dive into this evening. So yesterday was quite a sort of meditative vibe, and today is a little bit more structured. So we touched into the heart yesterday, and of course, this will be a heart session, but it's also quite a lot of the head. This sort of mix between soul and structure, devotion and discernment. And we're going to do a couple of things. We'll check in a moment. I'll do a little meditation again to get us all grounded. And then I'm going to explore a couple of key things to consider and sort of paradigm shifts in terms of how you think about what might be required of you to hold space. And this is based on the mistakes that I most often see when people start holding circles. So to help you try and avoid some of those pitfalls. And then we're going to look at some really high level facilitation principles that I hope will really serve you in a way that's really valuable for months and perhaps years to come. Like, it's really important to me that although this is a free experience, that you get as much value as you can from it. So I have poured a lot into it. And I just want to say that you cannot expect to understand everything the first time or get it all down on paper. Do your best. Be as present as you can. We'll send out a replay. And just soak in what works and what you can, the little nuggets that you glean. So before we do that, I'd love to hear how you are. Just a word in the chat box, perhaps. How are you arriving in today's space? Tired, excited, okay, tired but grateful, overwhelmed, doing well, energized, magical. grounded, calm, fractured, a bit rushed, exhausted, calm and centered. We've got the full spectrum of experience in the space, as we so often do when we gather in this way. So let's just give ourselves a moment to land here and to see if we can give as much of ourselves as possible for the next hour. So if you have a candle, taking a moment to light it, and if you don't, I will light one for the group. And perhaps as you light that candle, just reconnecting to those 3 circles we touched into last night. Almost as if we were lighting 3 different candles. I have one with me today, you might have one with you. But one is for yourself, the facilitator you're becoming, the version of you that is stepping in to the kind of compassionate leader that our world needs right now. And then touching for a moment into that connection you had to your community. So those you are here to serve and hold and to learn from. And then finally taking a moment to touch into what we talked about last night, the ripple effect in our worlds, the ripples of healing and belonging and connection that this work can create. And to help us this evening, let's see if we can touch into a moment of stillness. So you might want to close your eyes if it feels safe and comfortable. You might want to soften your gaze if you prefer. Taking a moment to let your breath soften, to let your body sink in to the surface on which it's resting. Feeling the seat beneath you, the earth holding you, and the breath arriving and leaving, finding its own gentle pace. And just taking a moment, just a moment, to let you return, let yourself return to that vision that brought you here that we touched into last night. That flicker of longing, that sense that the circle is calling you. Some of you said you were responding to the call to be here. That yearning you have to hold space that matters. And that quiet knowing, that sense of this is something I'm meant to do. And as you sit there, if you're able to do so, I invite you to imagine that the vision within, it might live in your heart, it might live somewhere else in your body, is a single thread of golden light. And that thread starts to weave outward to the woman sitting beside you on this call, to another heart across the world that's beating with that same longing, to another woman, and another, and another, and another, until thread by thread by thread, a web begins to form. And as you do this, you're not alone. This is a shared weaving, a collective remembering, a sacred task that we get to do together. And let that web hold us this evening. And as you imagine it, perhaps a web of golden light across the globe, bring your awareness back into your body, into your belly, your hips, your spine, your root. And this vision and this dream of this collective weaving of circle is beautiful. But it will ask for roots and for devotion. It will ask for learning and care and action. So let yourself feel that too. This invitation to grow deep and wide roots beneath your vision. To become someone who can lead in a way that just isn't led with passion, but also with power and clarity and integrity. Breathing for a moment. Listening to anything that's arising within you. And then when you're ready, taking a few deep breaths, feeling your feet firmly planted on the ground. Slowly opening your eyes. And perhaps just taking a moment to stretch. Perhaps just taking a moment, if you had your eyes closed, to literally reorient yourself in the room you're in, looking at the walls, the ceiling, perhaps the floor. Rooting down into where you are in your physical environment. Beautiful. Okay. So we touched last night into the mix in the room of experience. You know, some of you are brand new to this kind of space. Some of you have lots of experience. Some of you have some experience. Some of you have kind of half done circles almost by accident. And before we dive into what we're going to do tonight, I just want to say something really loud and clear, that you do not need to have any kind of particular experience to hold circles, and you don't need a particular background. And we'll dive into that more today, how you balance, if you are from a background that isn't a space holding background, how you balance that with being ethical and being responsible. But when I think about, you know, I run this accredited training, I run it a couple of times a year. And when I think about the last 12 months, the spectrum of women who've come in, we've had senior doctors, we've had a head teacher, we've had an opera director train recently, a pharmacist, a TV presenter, someone who used to be a police officer, Reiki masters, therapists, counsellors, retreat facilitators, you know, a real mix of what you might consider a healing arts background, a therapeutic background, and nothing to do with that, a wide range of normal jobs. So you are not an outsider if this isn't your work in the world at the moment. And it feels really important to say that it's not your background that qualifies you to do this work. What really matters is your care and your presence and your willingness to do this work with integrity. Chronically ill people have done this as well. Of course, I can't name the spectrum of everyone. My point is there are so many different types of professional background, so many types of moment in life that people come from. We have all sorts of people from across the spectrum. And the essence of what I'm saying here is that there isn't anything that excludes you from doing it, apart from the desire to learn to do it well. And that's what we're here to dive into this evening. And, you know, I touched into yesterday that this work is a spiral, and some of you will have will be further down the spiral. You'll have held space before, and some of you will be brand new. And so know that you might be hearing this for the first time, or you might be hearing some of this for the millionth time, and it will land differently for each of you. So I'm going to touch on a couple of paradigm shifts, I'm going to call them, of different shifts that you can make in terms of how you might approach circle work. And some of the myths that I see people share with me or I see out in the world about circle facilitation. One of them, and you can tell me if this resonates, and it's a very superficial one, but my goodness, it runs deep in terms of what it brings up in terms of within people. The idea that you have to look or be a certain way to hold this work, that you have to have a particular aesthetic, or you have to be from a particular background. You know, if you Google women's circle, the images that come up are really quite binary, quite singular, forgive me, in the way they look. They are not generally diverse. They often are beautiful white women with very long hair and flowing robes, sort of frolicking in a field and having a lovely time. They're often under 30. You know, I'm yet to see a beautiful picture of elders holding space, of a genuinely diverse mix of women. And sometimes people see this, someone just said in the chat, this is what daunts me. They see this and they count themselves out. And I am here to say you do not need to fit any particular image. And you do not need to be someone who is radiant and grounded 24/7. You don't need to be anyone other than yourself. And you don't need, and we touched on this last night, to be healed yourself or without challenge in your life. And sometimes I do these sessions and people get a particular image of me and they're like, that's all right for you to say, because you seem very calm and grounded and whatever image people perceive me to be. I was laughing about 90 minutes ago. I had a toddler on my back, a 5-year-old having a tantrum on the floor. I was like carrying all the school bags like a pack horse, and I couldn't have looked or felt less grounded, less regulated, less sort of, wasn't in a very good place 90 minutes ago. I still don't fit the image of a circle facilitator all of the time, but what being a facilitator of circle allows me to do is to get to touch into a version of myself that is grounded and is rooted and is connected. It's one version of me that I get to express through this, and there are many other versions that live out in the world. So all each of you needs to do is touch into the version of you that you want to express in circle. How you present doesn't matter. The quality of your presence is what matters. The depth of your listening is what matters. Your ability to create and sustain a sense of true belonging in the space doesn't matter. And I'm really curious, who has felt that they don't fit the image of a circle facilitator in some way? And some of you might fit exactly what I'm describing, and that is welcome to. Lots of people saying me in the chat. Yeah. It surprised me when I became aware of how many people count themselves out on this basis. It can be one of the biggest things that holds people back. And I have to say, from having had so many people come through my trainings over the years, one of the many things that creates a real sense of permission and safety in the space is your glorious imperfection, the things that you get wrong, the humanity that you bring. And the space, you know, circle facilitation isn't about being inspirational. It's about being real and not being above the group, but being with the group. When we lead in circle, it's not a kind of patriarchal top-down model of leadership. We lead from within. We speak less and we listen more. So you're all here on these calls. I'm doing a lot of talking for 60 minutes each night. If you came to my circles, say it was 90 minutes long, my circle, I would probably talk for 10, 15 minutes at the beginning to do the welcome and the guidelines and the grounding. I'll talk more about the structure of what I do in my circle later. And then it would be entirely handed over to the group and my facilitation would be invisible. We become the steward of the group and sort of a gentle center of gravity rather than a performer. at the front. And there's a wonderful book that I consider to be part of my lineage of Circle, the way that the knowledge and the practice has been passed down to me. And the book is called The Circle Way. And they talk about the idea of there being a leader in every chair in Circle. And that kind of approach is the kind of model that I really encourage you to embody. A facilitation style that is truthful and humble and really deeply human. And, you know, I've talked about, well, let me say this differently. Sometimes people think that you need to be really calm and grounded to hold Circle. And I want to say that there are so many people who come to this work and they deliver a really vivacious, joyful, personality-filled version of facilitation. You know, I touched last night about the importance of holding spaces for joy. You don't need to be calm all the time. The Circle Way is the book. Yeah, by the way, I can't see all of the chat tonight. So sometimes something catches my eye. If I don't see something you've said, it's not that I'm ignoring you. It's just that I'm trying to keep my place and also respond a bit to what's going on. Great. And I'm conscious that some of you might be sitting here thinking, that's fine that she's saying I need to touch into the authentic version of me and my own pathway with Circle, but how do I actually know what that is? And I'm really excited because I have created something that I've never done before, which is a quiz that helps you work out which of a couple of common archetypes of facilitator I see. And I'll be sending it out at the end of the session so that you can have a go and see if what comes up for you resonates. But there are many different paths for this work, and hopefully taking the quiz will support you with that. So it'll be with you in your email after the session. People saying in the chat, love a quiz. I love a quiz. I'm really hoping that it goes down well. I'm excited to share it with you later. So aesthetics don't matter, presence matters. This one is a bit more of a practical one, the second paradigm shift, which is moving from over facilitation to more of a sense of grounded sufficiency. So moving from over facilitation, I'll define what I mean by that in a moment, to a sense of grounded sufficiency. I want to talk about the impulse and the tendency to do too much when you're facilitating a circle. So when when I set out this invitation, the invitation was, come and learn how to hold a women's circle. Whose mind was drawn to the idea of doing things? Who was like, oh, what will I do? What will I learn about doing? 1,000% with about 1 million zeros. Yeah, lots of resonance. And maybe you imagine when you think of a circle, okay, I will do a meditation and I'll do some journaling and maybe I'll serve some cacao, or I might do some movement, or I might pull some oracle cards, or I might do some sharing prompts. A sense of having back-to-back activities. Has anyone been on one of those beautiful retreats where you have like maybe a day or half a day and the people are so excited to have you there and they want to give you so much value? You've paid for a ticket. You've paid to be with them and they want you to have an amazing time. And so it's just non-stop stuff. Is that familiar to some of you? Yes, I just wanted to rest. Yeah. I once went to actually, no, I'm not going to tell you that story now. I'll tell you at a different time. It can be really tempting to do that. And the reason we can be tempted to do that is because many of us, I'm going to imagine the vast majority of us, have been conditioned and raised in that, we talked yesterday about that patriarchal, capitalistic way of being that values output and suggests that if you are inviting people into a space and they're giving you their time, perhaps they're giving you their money, that you need to give them immense value. And perhaps you have assumptions about what value looks like. And it comes from a really beautiful space. But what I want to give you the permission to do is to have a different approach in circle. One that centers doing less. One that centers more space. That centers more presence. That really tries to avoid the desire to impress. And we've all been, so many of us will have been there. In one of my first ever circles, I was really excited because someone was coming who had a big profile and they were someone I deeply admired, and I knew they were a fantastic facilitator themselves, and I really wanted to show them. There was this kind of childlike part of me that wanted to impress them, that wanted to sort of get them to give me some sort of gold star and show them what a brilliant facilitator I was. And what I ended up doing was I ended up doing far too much, and the space was less potent as a result. Some of the most powerful spaces you can hold, and many of the most powerful spaces that I have held, and I know that there are many people who've been in spaces with me before, circles that I've held, less has been more. There's a real comfort with silence. Silence is treated as sacred. There is this allowing of spaciousness as the space where transformation can happen. I learned this in my documentary work, and perhaps any of you from a therapeutic or a counselling background will know that too, that it's in the moments that you leave silence that the most powerful and interesting shares can emerge. But it took me a little bit of time to learn that that applies to circle too. So my message to you is to resist the urge to pack full the space. And I'm going to talk about what I do in my space a little bit later, what the structure is. And as I'm sharing this, and I touched into silence a moment ago, I don't know if any of you have ever heard this beautiful quotation by Rumi, but he wrote, "Listen to silence, it has much to say." Listens to silence, it has much to say. And so if you're to take one thing from this evening in terms of doing less, see if it can be that quotation. Listen to silence, it has much to say. Don't rush to fill it or make it mean that you're not doing a good job. Let it arise. And so I'm just going to invite you to just take a moment of reflection. So if you are facilitating already, where might you fall into that trap of over-facilitation? Where might you fall into that trap of over-facilitation? What would it mean to trust the space more deeply? What would it mean to trust the space more deeply? And crucially, can I allow my nervous system to not know what will happen? This is the work. Can I allow my nervous system to not know what will happen? So those are some things to take with you. So that's at one end of the spectrum, over facilitation. And then there's the complete other end of the spectrum, which is under facilitating. And this also comes from a good place. It comes from the place of people thinking, I trust my intuition. I'm a very intuitive person. I'll just intuitively go with the flow. And there is much value, and actually our intuition is absolutely essential in holding circle space. But circle space can be a deeply vulnerable space. And if we're not prepared or trained or have some grounding in this work, we can cause real harm. And harm can be really subtle or it can be significant. And I've had so many people come to me over the years who've been wounded or hurt or harmed in circle in some way, and it has stayed with them for months and years on end. I'm really curious if any of you have ever been in a circle space or a circle type space where you felt unsafe or unheld or harmed in some way. I'm getting some yeses in the chat. Lots of yeses. One person so far said thankfully no, but I'm seeing the majority of people saying yes, being a witness to it. I'm going to give you an example of an experience that I had. Was it this year? At some point in the last year or so, with an incredibly experienced facilitator, someone I deeply trusted, someone who really is accomplished in their craft and their practice. But what happened in the space was I had a big emotional release, i.e., I really started crying. I was really crying, and it was because I felt so safe in her presence. It was a big moment for me to feel safe enough to let all that I was holding go. And what I needed in that moment was for the tears to be welcome and the tears to flow. And what happened in that moment is that person, there was some discomfort within them that meant that they rushed to try and help. And they started trying to move my body to support me. And I said, oh, I don't really want this. And they sort of insisted and made me carry on. That was an example of harm in the moment in circle. And it's not something that I have carried for years, but it felt incredibly uncomfortable to me. And that safety that I'd experienced on such a deep level, there was a rupture. And there was a rupture that means that I might not return to that particular facilitator because that trust was lost. So that's more of an extreme example, but there are lots of subtle ways that it can happen. All of us will make mistakes. All of us will cause some harm. It's an inevitability, but we really want to try and avoid it as much as possible. So we're going to dive into lots of things tonight to consider that will help you with that. But whilst we want to bring intuition, as I mentioned, there are a couple of things that really matter. So a clear scope of practice. A clear scope of practice. Some of you might be familiar with that term. Some of you might be brand new for. Essentially, it means what is my job and what isn't my job in this particular space. And one of the exercises that I get all of my trainees to do when people come and train with me is to do a scope of practice exercise, particularly if you hold another role. It's often the therapists and the counsellors in the room who really have to step out of that identity into circle facilitation identity. So what are you there to do in the space and what are you not to do? So some things you are there to do is be a guardian, a steward, to set up the space in a way that everyone knows what is expected, what the guidelines of the group are, and to really hold the space in a gentle way without being directive. That is part of the scope of practice that I have a facilitator. What's not my job in circle is to fix or to rescue, or like I just shared, to move the body of the person around, to rush in when someone's upset and to try and solve it. My job is to hold space. And so I really encourage you, if it's something that you do already or if it's something that you plan to do, to write yourself a little scope of practice. The second aspect that you need is really clear agreements about how the space operates. What are those agreements? And it will look different to each of you, depending on what kind of space you're holding. Here are some of the foundational ones that I use. Confidentiality, what stays in the circle, what is shared in the circle stays in the circle. That's often a common agreement. In my spaces, I say we don't give advice. Like, what a liberation to be able to share and not get 10 different voices saying what you should do. Some people don't have that agreement. I've been in circles myself. In fact, the first ever women's circle I went to, a person would share and then everyone else in the room would tell the person what they thought about that. This person had a lot of devoted circle goers. That model worked for some people. It doesn't resonate with me. So I have a model of no advice. Honouring silence and taking space and giving space is another set of agreements. So someone mentioned in the chat earlier about people dominating, having an agreement about how you will share time and space together so that doesn't happen. Trauma-informed awareness. I'm going to touch into this a little bit more later. Some sense of aftercare and integration. What happens when they leave the space? What happens when you are closing the circle and helping people transition out again? What do you do? How do you support people? And having a clear framework for how you hold space and what you do that just is like an invisible architecture beneath your space. So what's going to happen there that you know and that you can work with as your architecture and then respond to intuitively. I'll tell you about mine. Here's what happens in my circle. It's so simple. I'm probably going to tell you in about 2 minutes. People arrive. I give them a welcome. Maybe I tell something about my story. Maybe I share something about why I believe circle is important. Maybe I share a poem. Something that sets the scene, that creates the culture of the space. When I say creates the culture of the space, you will all have sensed last night when you came in what kind of space this is. What was it about the way that the space was created that helped you to do that? How was the culture created? I shared a bit of my beliefs. That was one of the things. I set a certain tone, I shared in a certain way. So that's the second thing. The third thing is I always offer some sort of meditation and grounding, a way of people to get out of their daily lives and cross a threshold into circle space. Often that involves touching, connecting to the body in some way. Sometimes it's some sort of visualization. Sometimes it's simply following the breath, but giving a pathway to presence, a way of people going inwards, noticing what's arising for them emotionally. Then I'll share the guidelines, the ones I've just mentioned, and then I'll offer one question for the evening, just one. And that question is often, what do you want to give voice to? Super simple question. And then I open the space and I usually don't intervene for the next 60 or so minutes. There are, of course, times when I would make an intervention, but not that many. So that's it. Everything else happens under the surface. The question is, what do you want to give voice to? That's the question I use. And to help you to really start to take facilitation seriously in terms of the many different aspects that are at play underneath the surface, I'm going to offer you in a minute just some sort of key pillars that we can work through, different parts of what it will take for you to be a really good facilitator. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but I just want to check if there's anything else that I need to say before I do. What we want to do is to move you from being someone who sort of gathers people around some candles to have a chat to someone who creates a really deep and sacred space, so that you can become the kind of person who can take some of what you're learning here and beyond and go and run a 3-day retreat or work with an organization who wants space holding for them. Recently, I've held spaces in more corporate environments, and there is a great thirst for people who are really good facilitators. These are the kind of skills that we want you to start to develop. So I'm going to share, I've got some slides to help us tonight. You don't need to get everything down. You don't need to understand everything perfectly. I'm just trying to give you as much to work with as possible in the time we have together, and hopefully we'll be able to get through it all. So bear with me while I try and share my screen. See if I can find it. Okay, we're going to talk through these one by one. The sacred role of facilitator, that is owning your scope, responsibility, and alignment. We touched into it earlier. The architecture of your circle, a fancy way of saying what happens in your space. The idea of creating brave space rather than safe space. Again, we'll touch into this in in a moment, but one of the things that will help do that is your own commitment to anti-oppression and inclusion. Holding with real care, so trauma-informed, nervous system-aware practice. Number 5 is one of my favorite ones, apprenticeship of the heart, like you really being in devotion to your own becoming with this work, i.e., how can you find a way of it being so soul nourishing for you that you just can't stop doing it? How can you become, I talked about it like bringing out different parts of ourselves. I have managed to touch into the most grounded, connected version of me through this work. What a gift. It's changed my entire life being able to do that. Embodied integrity, so boundaries, ethics, and professionalism. And then finally, for some of you who want to do this as paid work, not all of you will, but if you are going to do it as paid work, how to create and sell in a way that's soulful and again has that ethics and integrity at the heart. So how long we've got? I've got 17 minutes. I'm going to try and give you as much value as possible with each of these. How do I change the screen? Okay, the sacred role, scope, responsibility, and inner alignment. We've touched into this a little bit already, but the journey really begins with who you are when you sit in that seat of facilitator. The journey begins with who you are when you sit in that seat of the facilitator. So do you have a clearly defined scope of practice? What's yours to hold and what isn't? Do you have a sense in the room of how you can hold the power that comes with your role? Because even if you don't intend to wield power, there is a sort of invisible power dynamic as the person holding the space versus the participants, or at least there can be if you let it. How can you hold it ethically and humbly without collapsing so you're not holding the space with depth and integrity, or controlling? So many people fall into controlling without meaning to, being really directive about the outcome. I said yesterday, this is an experience-based space, not an outcome-based space. How can you trust yourself to do that? Do you have a sense of the energetic responsibility of holding a group? And where do you feel well resourced already? There is so much resource that many of you will have already. And where do you feel you need more support? There's always things to learn. So that's number 1. Number 2, the architecture of your circle. How are you designing it and structuring it? A powerful circle doesn't happen by accident. It's really intentionally designed to feel as safe as possible. We're going to talk about the word safety later, and sacred. And it's really interesting. There was someone who came to a lot of my spaces, both in person, pre-pandemic, and online during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, she just decided to train in leading circle with me. And we got about 4 weeks in, and she was like, I didn't know what I was going to learn, because when I'm in your circles, it looks like not very much is happening. I outlined those things that I do. They feel very light touch. And she was like, I didn't know that all of these things were happening under the surface. So each of you will need to have your own version of this invisible architecture. I'm just going to move my screen so I can read it. So some questions to ask yourselves. What do I consciously do in my circles that allows participants to feel seen and held and honoured? Do I understand how to open, sustain, and close a circle space with clarity? I didn't say earlier how I close a space. So after a period of time, after sharing, I would bring everyone back. I would reground everyone. I would usually give everyone the opportunity to share what's arisen for them in the circle. I would reiterate the key guideline of confidentiality. I would encourage people to take a very gentle exit from the space. I hold spaces in person and online, and it's particularly important online, because if you are in person, you've got a journey to take home. You move from this very sacred circle space and you can sort of pace yourself as you leave. Online, people are on their computers, on their phones. They are in often an environment where they'll just tumble into other people. So encouraging people to take real time and space as they leave. And then I usually close with sometimes with a poem or a thought, or sometimes by simply blowing out the candle. So that's just one option of how to close it, but I'm conscious I didn't mention that earlier when I was saying what I do. And then that question we touched into earlier, do I have a reliable structure or flow? And again, it doesn't need to be prescriptive. It doesn't need to be like a really detailed plan. It just needs to be one that is robust enough that you have all of the key elements and you also have space for intuition without overly relying on intuition. And that's the balance. Okay, this is a big one. Brave space, true belonging, anti-oppression and inclusivity in practice. So we cannot hold truly inclusive spaces unless they are brave, inclusive, and rooted in justice. So whatever work we have done before in this sphere, some of you might be brand new to this kind of way of being. Some of you might have done a lot of work. Some of you might have lived experience where you're from a marginalized group. All of us will have different things that we are not within our vision that we need to become aware to. And I've been doing anti-oppression work for over a decade. And I often feel like the more I learn, the less I know. I mean, it's like a never-ending cascade of lived experiences that people have that I had just never considered. And so this is something that isn't something that you like learn in an hour and then have nailed. It's more of a kind of unfolding in your space. And I'm going to talk a little bit quickly about, when I talk about brave space, what I mean by that. Who has heard the idea of safe space? Everyone wants to create a safe space. It's something we all want to aspire to. And I used to talk about safe space, and it's a really brilliant thing to strive towards. And then I became aware of this idea that none of us can ever hold a safe space, because what feels safe to me won't feel safe to you, and to you, and to you, and to you, and to you. It is impossible to hold safe space. Instead, what we can try and do is hold this notion of brave space, where there is, firstly, you do that by having this sort of anti-oppression commitment so that you are trying your best to be as inclusive as possible. But it's a space where we bring care and intention and mindfulness to the space, where we encourage people not to cause harm, but we also know and communicate to our participants in some way that the space can never be safe. And so we're encouraging people to show up as individual adults in the room. Safety is not guaranteed. Trust can be created, a sense of belonging can be created, but safety can't. And there are a couple of places that I learnt this idea of safe space to brave space. And there's two different places. One is a social justice book. It's called The Art of Effective Facilitation, I think. I should have it written on this slide, but I don't. And there's an essay there about creating brave space. Another amazing place that I learnt about brave space is an author called Adrienne Marie Brown. Marta from the team, maybe you can pop her name in a chat. She has a book called Holding Change, and there's an essay in there about holding brave space. So that's a really important shift that we all make. We can't guarantee safety, but we can help the conditions that everyone has an experience where harm is not being caused. The group agreements we touched on earlier, do they support both safety and accountability? Again, with that word safety, having that little we know we can't create real safety, but it's the best language we've got. And how do I respond to harm in a way that is reparative rather than performative? So can you receive feedback for someone to say, that wasn't okay for me? You know, last night I invited you all to unmute at the end. And a couple of people in the Facebook group said, I loved that. And a couple of people said, well, that was too much for my nervous system. And I was like, I hadn't considered that. And so it didn't feel like a criticism. It didn't feel like a complaint. It just felt like, of course, there's something else I haven't seen. How can I shift my space to accommodate those who enjoyed it and those who felt it was actually really unpleasant? And so I'm going to make a change at the end of today's session to accommodate both. That's an example of, you know, just really listening to those who are in your space. So making sure that we really take on feedback whilst also holding a strong spine. We cannot please everybody. It's impossible. You know, sometimes people are like, oh, if you could just X, Y, and Z, it's like, well, you have to have some sort of central plan. We can't, you know, if you've got a circle of 12 women, everyone will have a different opinion about what you should do. Your role is to be the steward and the guardian of the group, but also really respond to feedback about where harm has been caused. What time are we on? 23 minutes past. I think we're going to get through them all. Holding with care. Trauma-informed nervous system aware facilitation. What a mouthful. Let me talk you through it. The body remembers, and our capacity to hold others is shaped by our own nervous system awareness. Some of you won't have this yet, and that's okay. I didn't have trauma and nervous system training when I started holding circle. I do now. So this is a question to ask, and maybe it's something you seek out in the future. Do I have a foundational understanding of trauma and nervous system regulation? How do I help participants feel safe without controlling the space? And I'm going to give you one example of a way that you can help people feel safe-ish in a space, which is by using invitational language, making everything an invitation, not directive, i.e., you know, I always say, you might want to close your eyes or soften your gaze. If it resonates for you, you might want to. Giving options, you know, if anyone's been to a yoga class, many yoga teachers now will give options for different bodies. You want to give options for different nervous systems about how people participate. And again, you can't be exhaustive. Everyone has a different body, a different being, a different lived experience, different trigger points. It's impossible, but we can take steps to try and support that process. Am I attuned to signs of activation, freeze, or shutdown, and do I know what to do? You might not yet. That's okay. That's just to notice where you feel equipped and where you don't. And this is the most important one. And my example earlier of what happened to me speaks to this. Can I stay grounded when someone else is dysregulated, or do I get pulled in? We don't need to be afraid of human emotion in circle. The suppression of human emotion is what has made us so scared to hold it. Let the tears flow. Hold space for people to have their moment. It's okay for people to have big emotions in circle. You just need to make sure that you have enough skill and enough tools in your toolkit to make sure that you can really hold people in that without rushing and fixing. Apprenticeship of the heart. Your own becoming and being held. So before we hold others, we must let ourselves be held. There are a couple of people in the room who have trained me with me over the years. I saw Amber earlier, who was held for a long time before she trained. It's really wonderful to allow ourselves to have some sort of holding space. And they might not be circle, they can be other spaces. So do you have spaces of support and healing and reflection? Like, do you have somewhere to go yourself? We work with story in circle. Where are you being asked to tend to your own story with more honesty or gentleness? What do you need to resolve? Where do you need more holding yourself? We've talked about the spiral. Am I willing to be in the process, to be a student of this path again and again and again? And then finally, can I name the moments when I've been shaped and softened by this work? It's really helpful to be able to articulate what it is about this work that makes you want to hold it, so that you can draw people in and connect to them and help them find their own path to circle. Okay. Embodied integrity, ethics, boundaries, and professionalism. Integrity isn't about getting it right all the time. We've spoken about how we will all make mistakes, and that's okay, but it is about being clear and consistent and trustworthy. So again, a couple of questions to ask yourself. Have you got clear boundaries with participants and with yourself? Do you have ethical principles that guide you, or an ethical philosophy that is written down somewhere? My goodness, it was transformative to me when I wrote it down for the first time. It really became an anchor to my practice. And is this something that you revisit regularly? Do you know what to do if someone discloses harm or distress? And do you feel comfortable saying, I don't know, or that's not mine to hold, or no? There's a slight crossover here with scope of practice. Like, you need to be able to really work out what is outside your scope and find the support you need to sometimes direct participants to what they might need to signpost them. And then finally, the heart of business, creating and selling with soul. So some of you will want to make this part of your paid work in the world. I never imagined it would become my paid work in the world, and now it is. And in order for this work to be sustainable, we've got to find a way to learn to invite others into it with honesty and clarity and heart. So can you talk in your about your circle in a way that feels authentic and compelling? Can you receive money for this work without guilt or apology? Is your pricing aligned with your values and the value you offer? And do you invite people in with sort of pushy sales tactics, or more of a sense of sacred clarity? This is what I'm offering. This is what I invite you to. So we have been on a very broad-ranging tour for the last hour. I hope that that was helpful. I talked about the spiral. This is why the work never ends. You know, imagine if we covered so much there, and my intention for you is not to be overwhelmed and not to stop you doing it, but to give you a sense of all the different things to consider so that you don't bumble along in the way that I did to get to this point. Thank you for being here. Thank you, as ever, for your participation. Look out after this call for the quiz, which will be arriving in your email. And what we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to start to weave together some of the threads of what we've done already, and to start to think about how you might start to, I keep saying start a lot, sorry, just keep repeating the words start in ad infinitum, how you might take this out into the world. So what's next for you? If you do the quiz, it might be really helpful for you to work out what archetype of facilitator you are. I would love to invite you to close just by sharing a word in the chat about how you're leaving today's space. Clear, grateful, informed, hopeful, softened, fulfilled, uplifted, relaxed, empowered, encouraged, beautiful, contemplative. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Okay. I will see you tomorrow evening. To close, let's just blow out our candle. If we have one, I'll blow up the group. And in a moment, I'm going to invite everyone to unmute and say goodbye. So if that isn't good for your system, now is the moment for you to say goodbye, or you can turn your volume down. So I'm going to just unmute, let everyone unmute. Let me just see if I can do it. Oh. There we go. Is that working? If you want to say goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you. Bye.